All right, so again, we will be recording this session. We will put it up on the NASW Iowa Chapter YouTube channel, so you can share that with anybody who's missed out, or you can go back and watch it yourselves. And we've got two guest speakers with us here today. Keenan Crow from One Iowa will be joining us. Keenan's a good ally and colleague up at the State House. Very much, One Iowa is very much aligned with NASW, or NASW Iowa's aligned with One Iowa, or maybe both. I don't even know. We're often on the same side of the fight. Almost always. I can't even think of a time when we haven't been. Could probably think of one where maybe NASW was a little more neutral. I don't know. And so we know that Keenan, because of Keenan's organization and the work that they do, has to deal with some difficult people often, or people that are not exactly on the same side of the issue as One Iowa. And so I believe it was actually Marisue's idea to invite Keenan to be a speaker, feeling like we would get some really great information from them. And then Marisue Hartung will follow up on that with some just real nitty-gritty tactical information about what it's actually like, what you want to do when you're up at the Capitol. Just, kind of the logistics of it. So it's kind of a role reversal. We're going to have Keenan do the more social worky thing, and Marisue will do the more tactical thing. So that's kind of fun. And Marisue is the chair of the Iowa Political Action for Candidate Election Committee. And we'll start off with Keenan. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring that. If it seems like something we should just, I should slow you down for, I'll do that, Keenan. Otherwise, we can hold them till the end of your section, and then we'll go to Marisue, and then we'll open it up for questions. So plenty of time for questions, folks, and please feel free to ask anything, because that place up there is this odd combination of extremely formal and yet in some ways very informal. And there's a lot of unwritten rules. So if you're planning to join us for Lobby Day or any time at the Capitol, it is helpful to know a little bit of that background. So don't be afraid to ask any questions. And I'm just gonna then turn it over to Keenan and let Keenan introduce themselves. Thank you for
Yeah,
being
you
here.
bet. I call it Capitol High up there because it often functions like a high school. There's cliques and gossip and all sorts of unwritten rules that you have to know in order to be taken seriously. So, yeah, fun times. Yes, so give me 1 second. I'm gonna share my screen with y'all. And the first thing I just want to say is just don't be afraid to talk to legislators. There are, of course, folks who have different personality types. Some are kind of gruff and rough around the edges. Some are very polite. Most are very happy to talk to you. I would say that there's maybe only a handful of folks that I wouldn't recommend going out of your way to speak to on particular issues, but they're few and far between. And if they're, just rude, then they don't tend to last long, because politics is ultimately a job that requires you to interact with people. If you have to get voters, then it's really hard to just be kind of mean to everyone at all times. That's not really a good thing. So it's not likely that somebody is not going to be good at talking to folks and have soft skills. So go in being confident that they are there to listen. It is literally part of their job. But also know that while they would love to listen to everything that you have to say, that they also have limited time, and they talk to, 20 to 50 people a day, given constraints. And so it's kind of best to pick one or two really important things and focus on those. So if a legislator is thinking like, well, what conversation did I just have with that person? Their mind isn't going to 20 different directions, right? They think, oh, you talk to me about this, and I have a very clear idea. So good to pick one or two topics and kind of repeat them in various different ways so that folks know exactly what you're talking about and can think of what you're talking about. You do want to know your facts before you go in. Denise is a great resource for this on various pieces of legislation. Of course, any legislation that we're tracking, you can definitely reach out to me as well. Sometimes things look like they do one thing, but then there's like this little caveat. And if you don't actually know the legalese around it, it's sometimes tricky to actually figure out what's going on. So always good to touch base. A lot of times if we're having a lobby day, and I assume NASW probably does this as well, but we'll actually put fact sheets out, and that way you can reference those fact sheets. But don't shoot off the cuff, right? Like know exactly what the law does, know what you're asking for, what the current situation is, and either why you want that current situation to change or why you don't want it to change. Also important because I see a lot of people that will go up there and they'll just like be apologizing through their entire spiel. Don't do that. You don't need to apologize. This is your position, right? You shouldn't need to apologize for your position. That said, I don't know is not an apology. I don't know is just a statement of the situation that you're in, right? If somebody asks you a question and you legitimately do not know the answer to it, I don't know is not an apology. Feel free to say I don't know, and definitely say I don't know rather than giving incorrect information. Your most important asset up there, especially when you're talking to people that you may disagree with, is your credibility. Even if they disagree with you, you still need to be honest. So don't exaggerate, don't fabricate. That's the quickest way for people to ignore you forever in the future, because once you undercut that credibility up in that space, you are literally never going to get it back. Not only will that person know, but other people will know around them as well because they will tell them. So don't make anything up. And again, if you just don't know something and not knowing is detrimental to your point, oh well, better to be detrimental to that one particular point than to ruin your credibility forever into the future. So make sure that you're very, very clear about that. I do want to stop sharing this thing really quick and just go over very briefly how to read a bill, because I see folks making mistakes around this all the time. And if you don't know how to read one, then you are likely to make some of the same mistakes. So this is House File 88. The bill itself is not really important. This is a bill we're tracking and that we don't like, and so, you know, whatever. But it's got multiple different components, and this is going to be helpful in me showing you exactly how these work. So when you pull up a bill in Bill Book, this is kind of the page that you're going to get, right? You're going to get a sponsor list kind of up here that'll tell you all the different sponsors. You're going to get the bill title, and that's just kind of the topic and what it covers. The first thing I would suggest you do when you open Bill Book is scroll down to the bottom, because at the bottom of every bill, there is a section called Explanation. And under Explanation, it basically takes out all the legalese and it gives it to you in plain English as to what the bill is actually doing. So you can read through that explanation section first, and then after you've read through that explanation section, then you can go back into the bill text and see kind of what's going on in the legalese, and that'll help you understand the bill really significantly. The other thing to understand is the actual mechanics of bill drafting. So one thing in here that you're going to see is we've got a few things in this paragraph, and this paragraph does not say new paragraph. Some areas will say new section and they'll be underlined, and everything under that is new, right? But up here, we don't have anything that says new section. It's referencing an existing code section, and then it's got some stuff that's underlined and some stuff that's struck through. So the underlined stuff is all stuff that's being added to the text that wasn't there before. And the struck through stuff is all stuff that's being removed from the text that currently exists. And the stuff that is neither underlined or struck through is existing code. It's not being changed at all. That is the biggest mistake that I see people make. They assume that every word in a bill is new text, is something that is being altered. And so we will often hear people saying things like, oh, well, they're adding blah, blah, blah. So in here, they're adding language about compulsory attendance age or something like that. No, they're not. That's existing code language, because it's not in a new section area and it's not either struck or underlined. So that is all already already in code. That is not one of the things that legislators are changing. Like I said, if it says new section, then this is all new language underneath that new section area until you hit the next section. Now, the next section happens to also be new section language, and so that's all new as well. But if you see new section, this is all new language. The other kind of interesting bit on the bill book and something that you can consult in order to maybe better understand a piece of legislation, especially if it's confusing, is over here in this lobbyist declarations area. This can give you a lot of interesting info, and you can also switch it to show exactly who's for, who's against, and who is undecided. And so when I'm looking at this bill, let's see here, we've got like the family leader is for it, and Valor Iowa, and Iowa Faith and Freedom, and Americans for Prosperity, and Iowa Big Values, and who's against it? Well, one Iowa State Education, League of Women Voters, Common Good, Iowa Safe Schools. All right, well, these are mostly the groups that I align with, right? And these are mostly groups that I don't align with. And so if I didn't understand even what the bill text was, I could probably get a good understanding of perhaps where I would fall on this bill, even just by looking at those registrations and seeing who is for or against it. That's always information to have. You also get information in this bill history section about where it is in a given process. And then if it's got different versions of the legislation, like a House version or a Senate version, you will get all of that over on that side. So that's a very quick overview of how to read a bill, but that will put you above and beyond the average person who is interacting with the legislature. All right, back to my actual slide deck here. So now that you've understood the bill, the next thing that you're really going to want to do is try to relate it to real life, try to bring a story into it. Statistics are great, but the thing is that legislators hardly ever change their minds based on statistics alone. Statistics are good to verify what your story is saying and that it's not just happening to you or your family, but statistics are not good to present just kind of in and of themselves because they're just not very convincing to people. That's not how people change their minds. So what you want to do is kind of relate the positive impact of the law or policy and the problems it's going to correct, or if you're against it, you want to relate the negative impact of changing the law and the problems that it's going to create. If you are affected personally, tell them your story. Let them know how this is going to impact you. Let them know how it's impacting your family, your friends, your coworkers, whoever it might be. If you don't have a direct impact story, the next best thing is what I call a value shift frame. And what a value shift frame sounds like is, I used to believe the same thing that you did, and then this thing happened, and now I believe this other thing. And that this thing that happened, that's kind of the important bit, right? Because if you did used to believe that, then whatever changed your mind is probably likely to have an impact on that person as well. Like, just assume that if you used to share that belief, then whatever changed your mind has a better chance of changing their mind than something else did, because you were literally in the same position, right? So if you share similar values with that person, that's going to definitely be a thing. Finding common ground is super, super important. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be common ground on policy issues, but you do need to humanize yourself to a certain extent in these conversations. And so even if you share the same favorite movie or the same favorite sports team, just interjecting a little bit of levity into the conversation and showing that there is common ground in that conversation can be very helpful. This is kind of the meat and potatoes of what I always try to do when I am having a conversation with someone with whom I am diametrically opposed. And this is what I call a value matching exercise. So you start by just writing what your comments are going to be, just writing them out full heart. This is exactly what I would want to say in an ideal world. If I could say anything, this is what I would want to express. Now, the next thing you do after you've written all your comments is you make a list on the left-hand side of a piece of paper with all of your values, all of the things that are politically important to you. And that could be things like equality, fairness, non-discrimination, you might value family, you might value your community, all the things that you really care about and that are important to you. Now, on the right-hand side, you're going to make a list of all your opponent's values. And the important thing with this one is that you're not going to make that list based on what you think your opponent's values are. You would want to make that list based on how they would express those particular values. So you should be able to, in an ideal situation, present your opponent with that list of values, and they would say, yes, that's a fair characterization of what I believe. And so you won't want to put them in negative terms, right? You'll want to put them in positive terms that they could actually relate to. Now, the next step is tricky, but try your best to draw lines across from your values to something that is a pretty good match on the other side that matches your opponent's value in some way, shape, or form, right? They don't have to be necessarily like perfect, but they should be close. They should at least get the gist of what you're trying to communicate. So for instance, you might have written that you value fairness, and you could match that to a conservative value of equality under the law. That's something that they would say that they support. That's a pretty good match for fairness, right? It's not necessarily, it gets you everything that you want out of it, but it gets you enough that you can actually have a conversation out of it. It's also extremely likely that you will share some values almost identically. Basically, everybody values family. Basically, everybody values community. Basically, everybody values hard work, right? So there are going to be some one-to-one matches, but then there's going to be some that you're going to have to fudge just a little bit. Now, the last step is the trickiest, but it's the most important, and that's that you're going to take those comments that you had written before, and you're going to remove all the words that have your value statements in them, and you're going to replace them with the ones that you matched across those columns. That doesn't actually change the core of your message. It doesn't change what you're communicating, but it does translate it into what I call conservative-ese, right? It's just a different way of talking, and so it's going to make it more palatable for your opponent to hear what you're saying if you just talk in their value set. Even if you're expressing an idea that they're not going to agree with, you're still talking in a language that they're going to understand and appreciate and be able to connect with in some way. If you can do this, you can have a conversation with literally anyone across the board. It doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter how extreme they are. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to agree with you, but you are going to be able to have a productive conversation in this way because you're going to be speaking the same language. Folks with different value sets ultimately use different words. And so sometimes what ends up happening is we just talk across each other instead of actually having a real conversation. This is an attempt to mitigate that to the best of our ability. Again, it's not perfect. Sometimes it's not one-to-one, but it's as kind of the best that we can do given the constraints and the divides that we have in our society right now. A few technical things, and this might also be covered by Marisue, but be understanding if a legislator has to leave for a vote or another meeting or committee business or something else and your conversation gets cut short. The vast majority of them don't get to set their own schedules. And so getting frustrated with them for something that's literally not in their control is not productive, and it's definitely not going to help make your point better. Also, don't be upset if you're meeting with the clerk rather than the legislator themselves. Every legislator has a clerk. Remember that those clerks provide crucial information to legislators on key votes. And so if you are the only person that has talked to that clerk and the legislator has no other information, congrats, you just got what you wanted, because that clerk is going to feed that information across to that legislator. And again, if that's the only piece of information, you win, because that's the only thing that got to them in the time allotted. Also, if you said "I don't know" from our conversation earlier about how "I don't know" is not an apology or bad thing to say, make sure that you get back to them with that piece of information. It doesn't necessarily have to be you either. It could be somebody else like me, right? Like you said, "Hey, I'm going to get back to you," and then you tell me, "Hey, I needed this piece of information," and then I go tell that person, "Hey, person X said that you needed this piece of information, so here it is." That's a totally fine way of getting them that information as well. Also, not everybody gets a chance to meet with their legislators when they go up, and that's okay. Your presence is important, and you can always leave a note with your cell phone so that they can get in touch with you later. That is also a very important thing to do. Be as polite and gracious as possible. I know that that's not always super easy, but to the best of your ability, be as polite as you obviously can. Try to think of conversations that you've had that have changed your mind in the past. Have any of them been particularly mean and hostile? Probably not a lot of them. There may be some exceptions to that rule, but most of the things that changed your mind probably happened in a polite, gracious way, and where somebody was trying to understand where you were coming from and was trying to kind of lead you there. Try to be that person as well. There is, of course, a difference between your moral right to be outraged, which you absolutely have, and the strategic concern of how to best change someone's mind. And those are not necessarily the same thing. It may be the case that you are absolutely morally entitled to be pissed at this person, right? But at the same time, it might not be the most strategically efficacious way to go about having that conversation. So there's typically two outcomes in those situations, right? You have to decide whether you want to change that person's mind or whether you just want to make a point. And both are valid in different ways, but make sure you know which one you want to do because they are diametrically opposed in strategic outcome. If you start arguing with the legislator, you are probably not going to change their mind. So don't argue back and forth. Just calmly, assertively explain your opinion. If you get pushback, just say, "Listen, I don't want to argue with you. I just want you to consider blah, blah, blah," and then conversation over. Encourage questions, be prepared to discuss, know what that legislator is likely to ask you, and be prepared to follow up with those responses. After you've had your conversation, make sure you ask for what you want. That is the number one thing that people forget, to, at the end of the conversation, say, "So will you vote against this?" or "So will you vote for this?" They are unlikely to give you a clear response, but you still need to make that ask because sometimes they will give you a clear response, and then you have the opportunity to follow up with them on that later. Leave FACMA sheets or materials. Sorry, that's for a previous slide deck, so you're not talking about panic defense, but that's okay. And then get their name, and at the end of it, write a thank you email or a note. Note is probably a little bit better, but this thank you gives you an opportunity to do two different very important things that will make you stand out. Number one, these people, 90 to 99% of their interactions every day are people that are upset with them, that don't like what they're doing, and basically are going to like threaten to vote them out or something like that at the end of the interaction. If you give them a thank you, that makes you stand out in a very unique way, in that, yes, you might not have agreed with them, but you are being polite, you're being courteous, and you're showing that you have respect for their time and their attention that you got during the day. It also gives you an opportunity to repeat what that conversation was. And we know that repetition legitimizes. We know that getting that extra repetition in there is likely to make whatever conversation that you had stick over a longer period of time. So not only are you making yourself stand out, you're also getting that extra opportunity to reify what you had just said. So I'm going to stop here, and I will either take questions or give it over to Marisue. I'm not sure exactly where we're at in the process, but I'm happy to do whatever we're doing next.
We do have one question, Keenan, and I think it's interesting because I think there's pros and cons to this.
Sure.
Lisa asked briefly, what is the process for an organization to be recognized as a lobbyist in Iowa,
Mm.
to be able to record against, neutral, or for a bill? Can individuals be recognized as lobbyists?
Yes. So there are definitely positives and negatives to this, right? The obvious positive is that you get your name in that list of lobbyist declarations, and that sends a message about where your values stand and what you're communicating. The downside, though, is as soon as you're registered as a lobbyist, you're bound by all the ethics rules in a way that you would not be otherwise. And so you can be brought up on ethics violations. You're no longer allowed on the House floor during the legislative session. There's all sorts of different things that you are all of a sudden bound by that you weren't in your capacity as just a private citizen. And so often I would say, unless you're like representing an organization, that trade-off is just so detrimental generally that it's not worth it. It's pretty much only worth it if you are going to be doing it for a substantial amount of time, or if you are a direct representative of a particular organization, because that organizational name has some kind of thrust and power behind it, right? Whereas just like if I were to just register as me, Keenan Crow, the person, that doesn't have nearly as much thrust as like me, Keenan Crow, the representative of One Iowa, which is an organization that has, 20,000 followers or whatever it is. So what we're trying to communicate with those lobbyist registrations is like the power that we have behind us and not necessarily just our value set. And so you really have to calculate, is it worth being bound by all these additional ethics rules in order for me to be, registered as a lobbyist and have my name on there?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Keenan. And it's something I heard just recently, and I don't know if this is true, that if you are actually being paid by an organization, and I think it's paid to do lobbying, not necessarily if you're just, your organization, like for example, and I don't mean to throw them under the bus here, but Easter Seals has their own lobby day. If say that they have contract lobbyists, I don't know if they have somebody at Easter Seals who focuses on government relations, but I think then there's at some point you're required to be a registered lobbyist. I had heard, I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, I believe that's the case. I have not looked at the lobbyist statute for a minute there or at the rule set. I did notice they changed one ethics rule this year, and it's because literally nobody was doing it, and I didn't even know that it was a rule when I looked at the strikeout. So that was fascinating. It was basically that lobbyists have to like declare the issues they're going to be lobbying for before the session even starts, and I don't even know that half the time. So
I don't even know where you would do that.
yeah, I don't think that there's actually a system in place. So good
Oh.
for them for extracting that thing that we can't even do from the lobbyist rule set. But yes, I believe if you are being paid in a capacity to lobby, I believe you're required to. There are a couple other situations in which you are required to register as a lobbyist, but they're fairly narrow and they don't apply to most people unless again they're being paid to do it or they're in some way designated by their organization to do that role, right? So it's complicated. If you have questions, of course, would recommend reaching out to counsel about that or to the chief clerk of the chamber in which you intend to lobby, whether that's the House or the Senate or both. They will have information and guidelines about whether or not you have to register as a lobbyist.
And what about campaign finance and ethics? Do they that's where it falls under, right? But no, but I register as a lobbyist
With the clerk's
the
offices.
legislature. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Campaign ethics is a slightly different thing. You are bound by some of those as a lobbyist, and there are certain things that you can't do as a lobbyist, right? Like lobbyists cannot make donations to candidates while the legislature is in session in certain circumstances. And so there's all sorts of extra rules if you're going to be a registered lobbyist.
Right.
Um,
So like
yeah.
that's one of the bad things, I think, because so we've had one special election this session and then we're going to have
Mhm.
another one soon. And I cannot make an individual contribution
Right.
to either those candidates. Now, NASW Iowa chapter has a PAC, Iowa PACE.
Right.
So Iowa PACE could on the behalf of our members, but Denise Rathman, the executive
Right.
director and lobbyist, cannot. And I do sometimes make contributions
Yeah.
of my own accord, but that has to be, and I have accidentally broken the rules a couple times because I thought initially it was just the current legislators. That is not true. It's also the executive branch.
Yes. Yeah.
And that could be important during an election year. Like if you want, especially if you're wanting to support somebody, somebody who's running, you can't do that either. So
Yeah, I've gotten dinged for being on the Senate floor before too, because I didn't realize that was actually a rule that during session lobbyists cannot like set foot on the floor. They can't even like walk back behind to get to a different room. Not allowed. So
yeah, we used to be able to do it on the Senate as long as we
yeah.
didn't talk to anyone. We had
Yep.
to just
Yep. But I've gotten dinged on that. So
yeah,
don't.
and then when they try to talk to you and you're like, "Oh, shut up." But we can't even do that anymore because that room
Yes.
isn't there anymore.
Yeah, which is fair.
Okay.
I think that's a reasonable rule, but that's just an
Right.
example of of a thing that you couldn't do as a registered lobbyist.
Now, I will say though, there are some folks up there who individually are very, very active advocates, and they
Yes.
do actually have made up organizations that they have registered with.
Yes.
And and I don't, when I say made up, I don't mean that disparagingly. I mean, that's what the
No,
purpose
yeah, and
was.
you can do that, right? Like you
Yeah.
can make your own organization. It doesn't necessarily even have to be incorporated or anything like that.
Mm-mm.
You can
Mm-mm.
register as that organization. That's totally a thing that you can do. And there are some like very, very small organizations that do that. And that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. Keenan, could you give us any more examples? I really love that thing you said about the shared values and trying to like, okay,
Mm,
here are my values, here are what I assume in a
yeah.
positive way the legislators' values are. Got a couple more synonyms for us? Because I really like that.
Oh, I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Okay.
This is always a tricky thing for even me to do, honestly, because it's hard to kind of match across. But I'm always trying to think of like where can I put freedom in, right? Like that's
Right.
one of the things that they absolutely love. And so where can I put that word into a sentence because that's something that resonates with them. Family is something that resonates with them. If you are a person of faith, definitely share that you are a person of faith because that can resonate. And if you can use the language of faith, whatever your faith happens to be, that can resonate as well. Um, yeah. And also, somebody said they had noticed the same person as a lobbyist for several entities. Yes, that is a thing. Those people are typically called contract lobbyists. There's no like restriction on the number of organizations that you can lobby for. There are, of course, some uh, uh, ethical landmines that you could step on if you have too many of them, because you could end up in a situation where one organization wants you to register for something and one organization wants you to register against something, and then who gets priority, right? Like that's a weird thing and not something that I have to deal with on a regular basis because I'm a staff lobbyist, not a client lobbyist. But yes, that is absolutely something that can happen.
Yeah, and that's something you definitely if you consider hiring a contract lobbyist. NASW isn't
Yes.
rich enough to hire a contract lobbyist, so you guys are stuck with me.
But if you do hire a contract lobbyist, you need to know who their other contracts are, because
Mhm.
I have seen people and I have called people out before for having kind of mutually exclusive contracts where one client wins, the other client automatically loses, and that's not good.
Oof, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna think, Mary Sue, are you ready to jump on now? And then certainly if you have any more questions for Keenan, drop them in the chat and we'll have him answer at the end of the presentation. Mary
Good,
Sue.
yeah, very good information. Thank you, Keenan. Hello, everyone. I'm Marisue Hartung. I'm a member of NASW, have been for a number of decades, actually, so more than years. And I've served as the chair of Iowa PACE. PACE stands for Political Action for Candidate Election. And would certainly hope that many of you would consider becoming involved in NASW. And of course, PACE is one of the committees that you can become involved with. So that's my little plug. Okay, want to share with you one of my favorite quotes. And some of you may be aware that we've had social workers in Congress, we've had social workers in our legislature. One of the social workers we had many years ago, I think she was one of the first actually, she was a senator from Maryland, Barbara Mikulski. I had an opportunity to actually meet her. She's a very small woman and she used to carry literally a soapbox with her to stand on so she could be seen. Because when she came and spoke to us at a meeting in Washington, she had her box with her. But what she has often, and it's something I use all the time, she says, politics is social work with power. And if you think about it, that's what we do. We try to look at the system, look at the individual, try to make things better. And that is supposedly, I say that now, that used to be the case, make things better now at our legislature and congressional. We're going to focus in on the legislature today. And let me play with the React a little bit to get a sense of who's the audience. If you will go to the React and put thumbs up if you have met at the state capitol with your either senator or representative, say in the past year or so, would you put your thumbs up in your React? I just want to get a sense if anybody's had that opportunity to do that. Yeah, you have a lot of thumbs up, yes. Okay, good. Well, because I am going to start very much at the beginning and I didn't want to make this boring for people. But our legislative day is really your role as advocate in social work. And it's very important in social work that we do advocate for our clients. And so this advocacy is really an opportunity for you to meet and introduce yourself to legislators. And that is the simple part of it. You're going to meet with them. And how do you meet with them might be a question you thought about. Well, they've set this up for you, either on the House side or the Senate side. There is a wooden desk table. It has papers on it, little square papers. It has pens, and it has a chart. And on that chart is every one of the legislators, what their district is, but also more important is their seat number. And you get this little piece of paper that's there, and you fill that out. This is who I want to talk to. This is their seat number. This is their name, and who are you, and your reason. And it might just be I'm dropping off information for them, but quite often it's I'd like to meet with them, and you're going to be asked to put down some information. And who you're giving that to is the clerk of the House or the clerk of the Senate. And there might be several people actually standing out there kind of in that clerk role on busy time. So you will give that to them. You kind of hold it up in the air, and they'll identify you if you don't know who they are, and they will take it in, and you'll just have to wait. And I've usually not waited that long, maybe 5 minutes or so for the most part, unless they're actually in a vote or something, then I'm going to be waiting a lot longer. But most of the time someone will come out, either the legislature, in many cases, if the legislature knows me and who I am, and so they may come out, or their clerk may come out. And sometimes I've often said, because I've already talked to my legislators, like, I just want to let you know I was here, appreciate your movement on this bill, and you can always contact me if you have any questions. And sometimes their clerks will come out anyway, and just to say they said hi and they were glad you stopped by, and that's good. If they don't know you, what a great opportunity. You get to meet them and they get to meet you. You may or may not be one of their constituents. You may be a student in their area, and that's just as important as whether or not you, in fact, if you are a student, you're great because you can speak to the representative from where you're going to school, and you also get to speak to your representatives where you live. So if you're going to school in Sioux City, Iowa, but you actually live in Dubuque, you can talk to both those legislatures, one from where you live, one from where you go to school. It's when you're talking to a lot of lobbyists on an issue that you have no relationship, that we start looking more at lobbyists and not advocates. Okay, so you're there and you actually get an opportunity to have your legislator come out. You probably will be in that rotunda area speaking to them. It's not like they have offices. I think only some major leadership positions have offices. You do want to introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Marisue Hartung. I'm a student at Iowa State University. I originally grew up in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Depending on who you're talking to, you want to share those pieces of information. I'm here with my social work class, and we have been studying the welfare of children, and I'm very concerned about this study bill that you have coming up to look at a treatment facility for young women in the state of Iowa. I'm just using that as an example. Okay, now I'm going to take you back to something that Keenan, I'm going to share. This always takes me a few minutes here. You saw Keenan look at the bill. I'm going to bring up, I can find it here. Yeah. Okay. This is where he found this. This is very simple, legis.iowa.gov. And this will give you all that information. It looks a little different than what Keenan showed you, but you can see across the top here why it was. So we are going to look at legislators, and you want to find, let's go to their senators. I want to find my senator. Here's a whole list of senators. You can tell what, in terms of where they live, even though they may be representing, let's see, I just met Senator Warmy. She's newly elected. I live in Story County. She represents an area of Story County that's not my area. And she also represents a good portion of Marshall County. But since she was representing Story County, I had the opportunity to talk with her and meet her. But this is how I got in contact with her. I clicked on her email and said, I will be at the Capitol on Tuesday, February 11th, and would very much like to meet with you. Would you be available at these times? So this is a really good resource for you right here, the Iowa legislature, the legislation. I was going through committees and schedules today. I wanted to find out who's on Health and Human, oops, let's go. This is the Senate Health and Human Services. Look, these are all the people that are on that committee. Are any of them in your areas is what you'd want to know. And then the other thing you certainly want to know is what are the bills in the committee? And that gives you a full list of the bills. You can see a lot of these are relating to healthcare because of the Health and Human Services, but it does go into areas, regulation on psychologists, registered nurse, immunization exemptions. That's kind of an interesting area. So those are the bills under consideration and review by the committee. Not all bills get to be law, as we well know. So I'm gonna stop sharing this unless there are questions about that or accessing it before I move on.
No, but we did get feedback that was very helpful. So thanks.
Oh,
Marisue.
good. Yeah, I was looking at that earlier today and thought, what is this bill? I haven't seen that before. And next thing I know, 20 minutes had gone by. It's sort of like a Facebook, but with a lot of words instead of pictures. So it just kind of takes up your time. But it also helps you be an informed person when you go to the legislature, because there may be something, I see you serve on this committee. Could you tell me where you're at with this bill? That's a way of engaging with them. And again, you're trying to find that common ground. So you're not just saying, I'm here, I want you to vote this way. That we all know that communication doesn't work. So we want to build up some sort of common ground, even if it's just a little bit of common ground. You know, we're concerned about kids' health. We want to make sure. I believe we are concerned if we do immunize children. You don't. You know, could you tell me more about that? And if you have the time, again, time is precious when you're meeting with a constituent. Do you want to go to your ideal issue that you're concerned about, that, as it says, you want to make sure you're focused and you get that information out. You have a main message you want to deliver. You want to make sure you get that to them. You know, I've talked with legislators. Sometimes it's just been like 3 to 5 minutes. And other times they've been rather chatty and it's been like 10 to 12 minutes for whatever reason. I caught them at a good time is what I figure. Okay. I think if you have data, and I'm not talking about just statistical data, but information, you have to think about whether it will have an impact. If I tell you that Iowa ranks in the middle of something, that doesn't have a lot of impact. But if I tell you Iowa is number 2 in the number of cancer cases in the United States, and that's through the Iowa Cancer Registry, that information, that is a true statement. That has impact. That's going to get people's attention. So if what you're talking about has something that, you know, that's an important kind of fact to lead with. I wouldn't overdo that. I would look for the impact. You want to make sure that your information will help them in terms of making an impact in their committees with information if they don't already have that. I think that we also want to ask them if they have questions. You know, what would help them to know more about this? If you're not getting through to them, check that out with them. You're going to give them your message. You're going to be clear on, I really think this is important. I will hope, you know, I want to see this pass because this will have impact. It's another good word to use, impact on your constituents. It will have an impact in keeping young adults here in Iowa in our workforce. that's something they're big and focused on, because we have a depleted workforce, because we're just one of those states that's losing population. And it will be a benefit to your taxpayers. That would probably be a good one. And here's how, you'll put this preventive money in, so you won't have to pay for these expenses later on. That when I worked on a lot of programs where we were trying to front load the system for youth, and that was the whole idea, is that it's much cheaper to do preventative services for youth than having to send them to Boys Town out of state, because of the issues that have developed over those years of neglect. Let's see. So, and one of the things I want to make sure that people understand is, you're going to talk to your legislator on the Hill, or their clerk, or if they have staff people. And some of the ones in leadership may have a staff person. Don't forget the opportunity of meeting them back at home. I know that I live in Ames, Iowa, and we have a legislative session actually tomorrow over in Nevada, where we've invited we have one county, but we have multiple representatives in it, because some of them they have only Story County area. The ones in Ames basically have Ames area, but then we have a lot of them that have portions of Boone or Humboldt or Marshall, and if they can, they will come. And that's a good time. You show up for that. That makes an impact also. So don't forget that as an advocate, you want to take those opportunities. I think a lot of this, I wanted to go over some lobbying tips. I think we've really keep it brief, but keep it focused, making sure that you really know what your issue is, and what are the key things that will benefit, especially benefit your representative or senator's constituents. Keep that in mind. I noticed that you have a high number of elderly people, and myself included, in your certain area. What are you doing to make sure they have transportation access? If you know your representatives on the transportation committee, because if they can't get to medical care, they're going to have more serious problems. If they don't get mental health care because they're isolated and depressed, what is that going to lead to? What can we do to make sure that that doesn't happen? Great thing. I remember years ago when we were trying to pass licensing. So this was a long time ago. We had no licensing in the state of Iowa. And I remember being asked a question that I said, I really don't know, but you know what? I will be happy to find that out information, get back to you. And I did. And it was more of a money issue that I hadn't. It's like, how much revenue is that going to bring in? And I I don't know. I hadn't seen anything on it. So, and I thought, oh, that's right. We'll be paying for licensing, but it's also going to have a cost. So they were asking me, will the revenue offset the cost of what they're going to have to set up in licensing? And basically what we said, not totally, but it will be a source of revenues. I remember back then. I also remember a question, you do get things out of the blue sometimes. And she said, well, if we have to license, social workers, we have to license everybody, and it's hard to get licensed people to do this work. So that would be even harder to get social workers to do the work. And I said, you want people that aren't qualified conducting, counseling therapy with people? I think you'd want to know you have somebody. And so that was a spur of the moment reaction. I didn't expect that question from her about not wanting people to provide services who weren't licensed. But to me, it's like, I don't want to go to a doctor that doesn't have a license. I don't want to have a teacher that doesn't have a license. So you really have to kind of be open and prepared for whatever question you may get. Okay. Yeah. Know your audience, be aware. Hey, don't hesitate to tell a legislature, like I just said, that you will get back with them. You may, through your conversation, realize that, ooh, I hadn't thought about that. I want to do some more work on that and get back to them on it. Again, they may have a question you can't answer, and you can find the answer and get back to them. All of those are very critical. I love the point about sending thank you notes. Yes, really important. Appreciate, and very simply, again, even if you just have to go back to their email, appreciate that you took the time with me today. I enjoyed meeting you. And, you know, please call on me if you need any additional information about this bill. I'm going to stop for a minute here, see where we're at in terms of questions or people having concerns when they go to the Capitol. Not next
So-
week, but the week after,
Right, a week from Monday or Tuesday.
Tuesday.
So Dana Wickwire Cheek had a question about DEI concerns in higher education is an issue now. Keenan and I have spent a lot of quality time in subcommittee rooms about this. Any recommendations or advice for addressing our concerns with legislators? Keenan, what do you say?
Yeah, Keenan, I'm going to defer to you.
Fair enough. So with one thing you need to know about the current kind of conservative majority is that they hate three-letter acronyms, and I don't know why, but they do. So don't use them. If you're going to go talk to a legislator about a DEI concern, absolutely do not call it DEI. That shuts their brain off. It is a term that is politically loaded at this point, and half the time they don't even know what it refers to. They just know that they don't like it. So the better way to handle that conversation is to find a few of the programs that you like and that are generally agreeable that would be under the DEI kind of umbrella that would be impacted by whatever piece of legislation that you're talking about, and then ask them if they support those programs. And if they do, point out that that's what's being cut in that particular bill. Don't even refer to it as a DEI bill. Don't try not to let the words DEI escape your mouth. If you're talking about a DEI bill, would be my advice in that situation. And ditto for basically any other three-letter acronym, whether it's SEL or CRT or whatever. I just saw that there was a standards-based grading bill. Apparently they don't like that, and I was wondering why, and I asked one of my education friends, and he started saying, well, SBG, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, well, that's it. That's exactly what happened, that you turned it into a three-letter acronym, so don't do that. I don't know why that's the trigger these days, but any sort of three-letter acronym, it's a conversation stopper. It shuts people's critical thinking skills off. So just don't do it. If it's something like DEI, where you even saying the words out loud, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is going to stop the conversation as well, which I think is the case with that particular thing at the moment, then just go to the actual programming that it's cutting and don't use the acronym and don't use the umbrella term. And that way you'll have a much better shot with it.
So Keenan, social workers are in a really delicate situation around that because, and I agree, don't say diversity, don't say equity, don't say inclusion, which sounds so wrong for social workers to be thinking in that way.
I know.
Absolutely wrong. What do you think about the term cultural competence? I feel like that might not work out so well either, but maybe cultural humility, which is a term we use sometimes. And hey, social
Yeah.
workers, if you've got any ideas on this.
So those terms have specifically been named in some legislation as
Right.
well. So I would say that those are probably maybe to be avoided too. Again, what I would do is specifically describe what it is that you are trying to accomplish. So with cultural competency, what we're trying to do in a social work sense is we're trying to gain a better understanding of our clients that come from different backgrounds so that we can better serve them, right? I would literally say that.
Yeah, one of the examples I gave during one of the many times I've talked on this was end of life care. We
Yeah.
have to understand what families' perspectives are, and different families have different perspectives. And I don't think I use families, I probably use groups.
Yeah.
Yes, Dana, work with older Iowans. And I think that's something they don't even think about as being an issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because they really specifically are hyper focused on gender. I would just say sexuality in general, and then race.
Yeah.
And
Well, and they seem
so,
to think that DEI means quotas too, right?
yes.
So again, just try to get back to like, this is what we're trying to do with this. And I don't know how we're supposed to do it with something that's a piece of legislation that says the opposite of it, right?
Yeah.
Because even with like end of life care, or I mean, different cultures have different values around education. Different cultures have different values around courting and social interactions, like all sorts of different stuff. And if you don't know any of that, you're really at a disadvantage when you're going into some of these social work situations.
And not only are you as the social worker at a disadvantage, it's not good service for your clients.
Right.
Right.
You
Well,
don't want to
and
assume anything.
the
Yeah,
value matching exercise that I laid out, that's important for talking to conservative legislators, but it's also just an important skill to have as a social worker for when you're interacting with your clients, right? Like,
right.
here's my values, here's my client's values, and here's like the terminology that we're both using, and how can I make sure that I'm speaking in a way that my client actually understands?
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder maybe if we can use the phrase families when it's appropriate, because they are very, you want that strength. They want to strengthen families according to Project 2025.
Right.
So stronger families would be good.
Yes.
And making sure we serve different individuals who have different ideas. Is idea a bad word, Keenan? Can we use the word
No,
idea?
idea is not a bad word.
Okay.
Success is a good word. So
Okay.
like saying that you want to have, help your clients be successful, have successful outcomes. Those are all good things to say. Families is great. I love families instead of groups, because groups makes me think, oh, we're talking about race and gender and like
Yeah.
marginalized identities now, right? Like,
Right.
but families sounds so much more conservative friendly.
The family leader, for example, might
Right.
appreciate that, but the family leaders think that just because we're Iowa nice, we don't need any of this.
Right.
Oh, heavens. Yeah. Okay. Moving right along. I'll try not to turn this into a diatribe, because you get that if you're on the Government Relations Committee call on, usually held on Thursdays at 11. Let's see. I don't see any other questions. Oh, Marisue, I had a question for you. One of
Sure.
the things that you talk about often is what a difference it makes who's in power, because people will complain about their legislator not doing anything but their legislator is not in the majority party. So tell us a little bit about that, why that's your pet peeve.
I've been to enough meetings where people, okay, right now, if you're a Democrat, you may say, why aren't they changing this? Why aren't our Democrats introducing legislation onto the floor about, increasing the amount of money to education, doing more for healthcare for individuals? Well, the Democrats don't control what gets to the bills. The bills are decided by the leadership. The leadership is Republican, so they control which bills go to committee and which bills will be, have any kind of voice at all. And then from there are other factors, I think, that weigh in where they go besides the committees, but that's just me. But the thing is, they are introducing, and I've had to many times talk about our senator and representative and what they've tried to introduce, and they've just said fine. And I think it just gets tossed into the trash when they present it. So I think if you go and you talk to a Republican, they have the power. And those are the people you want to talk to, and you want to find out what are their interests. I guess we all have to, think in terms of, this is a human just like the rest of us, so that they have parents that might be ill. They may have children that need special education services. They may have health issues just like the rest of us. So they want the safety net, although they would probably never use that word. That's a social work word. So don't use safety net. But they want to make sure those services are there so their families and their loved ones can access them as well as other people. I've never understood. I can't give you an explanation of why we should have it and these people shouldn't. And when that comes into play, I just kind of I have to throw up my hands, because I can't explain that. Because to me, I feel very fortunate, and I know there are a lot of less fortunate people, and why shouldn't they have a nice home? Why shouldn't they have the opportunity, to do things, get an education, things like that?
Well, if they just pull themselves up by their bootstraps, Marisue, it
Yes,
wouldn't be a
that's
problem.
Yeah, you have to understand the underlying premise is like meritocracy, right? And so the people that have it are the people that deserve it. We
Yeah.
know that that's not the case, but that's the underlying
Yeah, that
belief.
is.
And the other thing, I mean, like going back to what Marisue was saying, is you have to know that like these people, for the most part, I mean, there's a few opportunists in there, right? Like we're not going to lie about that, but for the most part, almost everybody believes that they're doing the right thing. And if you just
Mhm.
follow their kind of underlying premises to their natural conclusion, what you're going to find is in their belief set, they think what they're doing is morally correct, right? Like you can't go in there envisioning thinking like, oh, these people got up one day and we're just like, I'm gonna be evil. Like, no, they are really trying to do the best with their current understanding. And so even if they disagree with you, it's not because they're trying to be evil, it's because you've got different underlying premises or like meta ethical frameworks or whatever it happens to be. The other thing that I would say, and again, just adding on to what Marisue said, is that the Iowa Republicans follow what's called the Hastert rule for the most part. And that means that if a majority of their party is not in favor of it, even if they would be able to pass it with Democrat support through the House, in other words, like a majority of the House would pass it if it got to the floor, but there's not a majority of Republicans wanting to pass it, then they're not going to bring it up. So that's also a big frustration too.
I think that was the gambling issue this year where they wanted to put the
Mhm.
moratorium on it. I think that's a good example of
Yes.
where, because that did an about face very quickly. It looked like they were going to do the moratorium and, Cedar, I think it was Cedar Rapids wasn't going to get there. And then all of a sudden it flipped and I thought, oh, something was going on there within the party, not the Democrats, but within the Republican Party is what
Oh, I think that was a much more of a regional issue than it was a party issue.
Right, because Cedar Rapids area in the eastern part of the state, yeah.
And there's
versus
a,
the western.
isn't Riverside south of Iowa City? It doesn't matter.
Yes.
There's a big casino that's kind of near, etc. So,
Yeah.
all right, it's 2001, folks. So
Oh,
thank you very much, Keenan Crow
we're
from One
we're
Iowa.
going to
Oh,
be
Marisue.
sending more information. Denise, you might tell them that we have resources that we can send them, things that I've talked about and such. So
I've dropped it in the chat, Marisue, and anybody who registers for Lobby Day will absolutely get a follow-up email with additional resources. So thank you, Keenan. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you. I have to say, Keenan always keeps their sense of humor, Keenan. And I appreciate that greatly because it can get pretty grim up there. And if we can't laugh, I don't know what we would do. So
We don't
thank
laugh,
you.
we'll cry. So
That's right. That's right. So thank you, Keenan. Appreciate you. And thank you
bet.
for being here today. Appreciate you too. And Marisue Hartung, thank you
Yep.
for being a longtime member and been somebody who's planned our legislative days for us. And everybody, we will send out CEU certificates for those of you who are looking for them. That will not happen until next week when Mike is here, because Mike does that work. And Mike's only here on Fridays. So, and we've got a lot going on. Be on the lookout for a lot of stuff for Social Work Month. Shireen Webster, who's on today, has done a bunch of work. So have a bunch of events. I have dropped into the chat where you can register for Legislative Day if you're interested in joining us. And then we've got another event coming up on Monday, the 17th, and that's going to be more policy oriented. It's specific to HF 385, improving aftercare upon psychiatric inpatient discharge. And that will be presented by Leslie Carpenter. She is one of those citizen advocates who is at the Capitol and actually pretty darn effective lobbyist. So we're lucky to have her presenting us. And that's a bill that she's advocating for very strongly. And you'll learn more about that on Monday. And again, we'll record that and we'll put that up on the YouTube channel too. So thank you, everybody who joined us. We appreciate it. Looks like there's one more message. March is Social Work Month, said Shireen. Yes, that's true. So we'll have more. Oh, she didn't send that to everyone, but there I said it out loud. That's all that matters. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. Be careful. It's going to be cold next week. And hopefully that means we'll have a nice legislative day on Tuesday, the 25th of February.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks. one of our new PACE members was on.
Oh,
Yeah, Dana,
oh, yeah, yeah. Mhm.
yeah. So I was glad to see
So
that.
here's what Dana's gonna do.
And does she teach, or I don't know what Dana does. I haven't met her yet. I just saw her name.
Yeah, so it is teaching now.
Okay.
But she's also been on the government relations committee for a while.
Oh, good,
Yeah,
good.
she's now the Northeast branch chair.
That's what I knew. It was a branch chair. I just didn't remember what area,
Yep.
but I didn't know what she did in real. Okay, good. Well, I was glad she was here and look
Yeah.
forward to meeting her on
And
legislative.
here's what
day.
she's gonna do. She's gonna just come and be available. I need to send them an email to any online students who don't have a
Oh,
professor. And then she can show them around and
great, great. Yeah.
yes.
No, I think that's really good. I've never been concerned about, students